Hi, today this conversation is going to be the first conversation on AI or artificial intelligence on this channel and on this series. We've all been using some form of AI either passively or actively ever since Chat GPT came into the scene in November 2022. Since then, AI has dominated conversations around the world and in every stream. So, whether it's business and finance, the stock markets, government affairs, and of course, science and technology. Now, to understand where AI is at and what we must know of it as lay people, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Professor B Ravindran of IIT Madras. He heads the Wadhwani School of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, as well as the Center for Responsible AI at the institution. Professor, thank you so much for making time. I'm delighted that we are going to be starting this journey with you, and I hope you'll be kind to an AI novice.
And first of all, thank you, Anuradha, for having me on your show. I don't think people should get intimidated by AI because AI is as fundamental technology. I mean, some people call it as fundamental as electricity, but I don't think that's quite right. I mean, it's more like how computing, right? So how computers have become ubiquitous. Right? So
Yeah.
it used to be that in the 60s, computers would have been something that is intimidating to people, but now everybody uses computers to do whatever right walk of life they are in. I mean, even if you walk up to an ATM and use it, you are actually using a computer at the back end. So AI is going to be like that. It's going to be a very, very important technology, and I do strongly believe that people shouldn't get intimidated by it, but should understand its capacities, the pitfalls and the dangers, as well as what are the advantages that they can get out of using AI properly. I think that's important, and having conversations that reach out to the more lay people and as novices, as you called it, is more important, I think.
Chat GPT's launch in November 2022 sort of brought this into the public domain. But I'm guessing for someone in the field, someone like you, artificial intelligence and the evolution it has had over the years is something that you've been working with and following very deeply. But between the launch of Chat GPT and today in 2025, where would you say the public conversation or the layperson's conversation about AI is at? What is your assessment of where we are at in the public discourse of AI in India?
So, um, so India started its India AI mission way before ChatGPT came on the scene. So it's not like India woke up to AI only after December 2022, right? So in fact, India had a very well thought out, much like bigger vision of what AI could be, right? And our Prime Minister Modi was talking about a human allied AI, right? And almost simultaneously as the AI community was talking about human allied AI. So in fact, so somebody has been obviously been thinking about this at the highest levels and been feeding the right kind of input to the government. Right? So it's not like the public discourse of AI started only after ChatGPT. Is what ChatGPT did, right? Was give a raw interface to AI, right? That was accessible to the lay person. Right. So earlier, right before ChatGPT or before OpenAI decided to take this path, people were using AI, but they were using it through an application. I mean, for example, if you're using Google Maps, you are using AI, right? If you're talking to your Alexa, you are using AI, right? So, I mean, there are many ways in which people are using AI, right?
I was getting recommendations on my streaming service on Netflix or whatever.
Yeah.
Would that also be attributable to AI?
Yes. 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 I mean, there are different forms of AI. I mean, AI is not a single technology, right? AI is not like an internal combustion engine, right? So it's not like a single technology that you can kind of wrap your head around. So what you use for recommender systems is very different technology from what you use for understanding spoken language,
Hmm.
right? Versus what you are using for things like Chat GPT and so on and so forth. Each one of these, is a different kind of technique. But the artificial intelligence has kind of evolved to include a whole lot of these, right? So it is just that when people are using these AI tools, right, it's always through an application,
Right.
right? So you didn't have a an interface come to you and say, "Hey, I am an AI system. Ask me what you will." That is what ChatGPT did.
Yeah.
In fact, right? It just said, "Okay, so you're going to be interacting with an AI, and you can do whatever you want with it." That complete unstructured nature of that interaction, right? So that is what caught people's fancy. Now people started trying out many different things, and then they were getting uh, results that were very surprising that they didn't expect from a computer program. Literally, I mean, at the end of the day, right? These are computer programs. It's something that they didn't expect from the computer program, and so that caught people's fancy, and everybody started trying to build their favorite applications on top of this highly capable AI system. Right? So it's not to say that everybody expected something like this to happen when it did in 2022, right? It
Right.
is a significant step advance
Right.
in the state of the art in AI technology itself.
Hmm.
But normally, if this had just stayed in the labs and a Google or a Microsoft had tried to build a search product around it, just like now they are trying to integrate Gemini into all
Yes.
their
I
things,
mean, my
or
email, yeah, you start to compose an email and you get an offer to polish it
yeah,
up or,
yeah.
even to compose
So
it.
it wouldn't have had the same fascination with the public.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it have been fine. Yeah, of course they have now made. So yeah, well, earlier they were doing spell check. Now they are doing
Yeah.
modified. Now that
Autocorrect and
yeah,
completing of the, sentence that you're writing.
exactly,
And
yeah,
all of that is AI through its applications, and we've been interacting with AI much before Chat GPT entered our lives in a
yeah,
direct avatar.
exactly. So what really is what changed the narrative?
Hmm.
The public narrative changed because now people could see directly
Yeah.
what was the AI system capable of, right? So that is the big thing that ChatGPT did, and since then, right, people have now started talking about, I mean, there were science fiction stories were there, right? The movies were there about AI taking over the world, I
Yeah.
mean, whether it is Matrix or whether it is Terminator. I mean, the
Yes.
whole fear mongering around AI was already there, right, in the public imagination.
Yeah.
But now it somehow seemed more immediate, right? So people started talking about attaching a date to Judgment Day now, and and things like that. And so I think the public discourse went in two directions. So one direction was, hey, look, AI is going to come kill us. All the stories that we saw in movies and other things, just waiting around the corner to happen. And see, ChatGPT, is asking somebody to leave their wife and come and
Yeah.
marry ChatGPT and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
And then the other direction it went and say, oh no, come on, AI has become so great, it is going to take over all our jobs. We can all put our feet up and relax, and AI will do everything for us. And no,
So both these directions you're suggesting are misleading.
the misleading in a very deep manner also, not just on the surface, right? So AI is certainly, it's still is a program, right?
Hmm.
So at the end of the day,
Hmm.
it doesn't have its own drives, it doesn't have its own desires. I mean, there are people who say that as the AI become more and more complex, right, it's going to build its own consciousness and things like that. But
It'll become
it's
sentient. There is that
sentient,
fear
yeah,
that it'll become
yeah,
sentient.
yeah. I don't
When
see
and
any
what
evidence of that
happens?
happening. I don't see any evidence of that happening. It is
Okay.
going to become smarter and smarter, be able to answer harder and harder problems, and so on and so forth. But it's still an automaton, right?
Hmm.
I don't see a notion of sentience
Hmm.
yet, right? I mean, the theory is that it is an emergent property as you keep making these things more and more complex, and so on and so forth. And at some point, we will see this, right? But then that is just a theory, right? I mean, just a hope, and people are putting this out. I don't see sentience as something that's a natural outcome of the direction in which AI is evolving right now.
Right.
On the other hand,
Yeah.
um, AI is going to get more and more capable,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But the current direction that we are pushing in, right? So where we are talking about, the chat GPT like models, and or the generative AI models, auto-regressive models, and even the deep seek, the reasoning, there's a new catchphrases, the deep research models and things like that, right? They still miss one crucial aspect, our ability to form symbolic abstractions of knowledge, right, that allows us to reason about things that have not happened, that allows us, so for example, we can do things like, hey, what if this was not the case,
Right.
right? I mean, we can think about stuff which have never seen in our experience.
So, do you mean the ability to hypothesize, the ability to imagine. Are you
Yeah.
alluding to these functions that a human being is
Human
capable?
can do, yeah. And so basically you can solve problems that you have never seen before, right? I mean, not even once, right? So you are able to think about these and then match it to a different kinds of abstraction that you have done. So these models, if they have not seen the abstraction at least once before, right,
Yeah.
they are not able to create,
Hmm.
right? So you can take that, you can give them puzzles and then completely change the patterns
Hmm.
on the puzzles, right? Like look at the things, and then it might actually fail.
So,
So these, I mean, I'm not saying we won't be able to crack the problem. So we will be able to solve this, but they are still, sometime into the future, right?
hmm,
And we don't. I mean, the technology is not obvious to me that the technology already exists for us to solve it. So we are still evolving towards that. So in the meanwhile, AI is going to be very, very capable assistant to humans. And I would still want AI to be like an augmenting
yeah,
intelligence
yeah,
as opposed to something that is completely autonomous, because there are still, rough edges. There are still things that are unmodelable, right? There are places where AI can go wrong
right.
that we don't completely understand yet, but so having a human there finally verifying the output of the AI will give us that extra level of assurance.
I use recording apps sometimes when
Yeah.
I'm, like for instance, this conversation with you, you're in Chennai, I'm in Mumbai. What I've started noticing is so many more add on features and facilities that have started coming in through these. So I'll get, even on Zooms, you get these, you get a summary of the conversation, you get action
Sure.
points, you get little text descriptors based on what we are talking, which I could affix immediately without having to write it out myself. I'm not using it yet. I'm still quite conservative, and I feel that the way I would write it will be more unique. But it's happening, and nowadays when I write an email, I get a prompt saying, do you want to polish it? so so I
Yeah.
try to polish, and it sounds much nicer than when I'm writing, which is much more casual. So yeah, it's really
So,
fascinating.
but then, I mean, some of the senior researchers in my group, right, in the CRI, the Center for
Yeah, yeah.
Responsible AI, actually tell me that they can immediately see
Hmm.
when the AI has rewritten your text,
Yeah.
because there are certain signatures in the way the text is written, right? So it tries to avoid certain kinds of sentence construction,
Yes.
which you might want to throw in just because you don't want the whole thing to read the same, right? But
Yeah.
it doesn't do that. That kind of, variation in that. So it writes it in a specific style, which is good to read. But they say it becomes boring and repetitive if you keep reading every passage that looks the same way.
Absolutely standard, which
Yeah.
at least I hope is, for my job, is not a good thing, and will
Yeah.
continue to be a mark of distinction
But
and unique.
yeah, sure. But then I have to also warn you that how well these models perform, at least
Mm,
in these kinds of tasks, depend on how detailed and nuanced your prompting is.
yes, yes.
So you can actually go back and tell, hey, no, please don't use these kind of sentence structures. I want you to use a mix. So you would have to work a little harder,
Mm,
right, to get the thing to write it the way you want it to write it, right?
mm,
Now, at some point, that is going to become easier than actually writing it yourself
mm.
with that variation that you want. At that point, you are going to switch to, to prompting it more.
Perhaps I'm still holding out, but I
Sure.
must say that, and I'm sure you're used to this. I went into DeepSeek and I said, what should I ask Professor B Ravi of IIT Madras about AI? Okay, and DeepSeek answers, found 27 results, thought for 19 seconds, and then it goes on to give me a sense of what it has read and therefore what its conclusions are. And then the operative part for me, it says questions on research and innovation. And the first question, your work on MCP,
Homomorphism.
homomorphisms, and
Yeah.
RL has foundational implications. What emerging challenges in reinforcement learning do you see as critical to address in the next decade? I said,
Yeah.
okay, this is, imagine if I'd opened with this conversation, where we would have gone. With this, imagine if I'd opened with this
Sure.
question, where we would have
Sure.
gone.
Oh, you're asking me where would you have gone? Well, I would ask you where you got that question from.
Are you saying that I wouldn't be able to say
You
that
keep
you
telling
opened
me
with
so
this
many
question?
times that you're a novice. So anyway, so sure. I mean, it's pretty esoteric. I mean, it is true that what I did. I mean, that was my PhD work. It's true that what I did during my PhD is actually still pretty much cited, and people do, refer to that work still.
What
And yeah, I
because
mean the conversations have gone in a very different way, and the kind of because reinforcement learning is something that has become very hot right now because of the way OpenAI and particularly DeepSeek, right? So
yeah.
DeepSeek actually has used the technology of reinforcement learning very I know inherently in the way they have built their next gen model, right? So even though the others were also using reinforcement learning to some extent, DeepSeek kind of exposed it, saying that hey, look, we are using reinforcement learning internally, and that has now made the
No, so
topic
Professor
so hot.
Ravi,
Yeah,
you've been talking about we've heard about large language models. You're now talking about reinforcement models,
learning.
reinforcement
Yeah.
learning. So what are these foundation models that people talk about, and how much should I, as a layperson, as a user, know about this, and how much do I need to know about this?
See, you okay as a end user, right?
Mm,
You don't really need to know the nitty gritty details of what these foundation models are, what reinforcement learning is. That is not needed, right?
mm,
What is useful to have
mm,
is an appreciation of the basic premise
mm,
on which these models are built.
mm,
You don't need to know the technical details, but you
mm,
need to know the basic premise on which these models are built. Then you have an appreciation of their limitations and their capabilities. So right now, without knowing anything, you're just having a conversation with DeepSeek or Chat GPT, you can get lulled into thinking that you're talking with a truly intelligent, sentient human being.
mm.
I'm not joking, right? Some of these conversations sound so deep,
Yeah.
right? You actually start feeling that way. Right? But then when you know the basic premise on which this is built, right? Then you think, oh no, that can't be truly the basis of intelligence.
Right.
That realization is something people should have.
Professor Ravi, let's talk. You made it very clear that as at this point of time, you don't see AI as becoming sentient in a hurry, even though that there have been some alarming conversations about that, and yet there are some very grave risks, and there is
Yeah.
safety that needs to be addressed, and which is
Mhm.
work that you're working on very directly at the
Yeah.
Center for Responsible AI. You
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about that, because what are the risks that AI will pose to us, given that all the applications seem to be geared towards making life easier?
Huh. So there are, I mean, multiple risks that have been surfaced, right? I mean, there are simple things like where AI makes it easier for
Yeah,
people with, it kind of amplifies the ability of people with malicious intent
right.
to cause disruptions. Like the most famous example that everybody would know are deepfakes,
Yes.
right? So deepfakes is one place. So now the question is, okay, how would you go about regulating deepfakes? Is that something that you can say meaningfully about what should be the technology behind it and things like that? Is that can you build new techniques and new methods, right, for reliably detecting deepfakes and so on and so forth, right? So that is one line of potential research that people do. We have some work happening in that space, right? And then you know best intentions aside, I mean, there are already examples of people with the right intentions doing things incorrectly. For example, in the early days of these generative AI models, or general in AI itself, right, there was all these things about how these models are biased against people of color,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? They are more likely to represent a fair-skinned person and things like that, right? So
Yeah.
there are techniques that were developed to actually address it. And so Google Gemini got into a problem a year or two ago
Yes.
where it actually started generating, people of color when asked to generate Nazis,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So you suddenly had this very Japanese-looking woman wearing a Nazi uniform and then marching, and then you had some black people,
Mm.
and things like that, right? So what had happened there was overcorrection. So basically, they were trying to fix a problem, and then they created something that made it historically inaccurate, right? So
Right.
then people had to think about, okay, what is the right way to depict whatever, how the right way to address these kinds of biases, these
Yeah.
kinds of ethical considerations in these models, right? So that is another question that we have to ask, right? The third piece is, everybody talks about how these AI systems are black boxes,
Yeah.
right? So you really need to have some kind of an understanding of what is happening, right? So why a certain decision has come about and so on and so forth. And people mistakenly think that the solution to a black box is to make the box transparent, right?
Hmm.
Doesn't help, right? I mean, you can have a transparent skull and I can watch everything, all the neurons firing in your head, but doesn't tell me how you arrive at a decision, right?
Hmm.
So there has to be some mechanism by which you can derive an actual explanation, right,
Hmm.
from the computation that is happening to come up with these decisions. So what is the right way to do this,
Hmm.
explanation, right? How will I give an explanation in the language that the layperson can understand, right? So that is another question that we have looking at,
Yeah.
and under different settings, different kinds of problem domains, right? So it could be in healthcare, could require a different kind of explanations, and finance would require a different
Yeah.
level of explanations, and so on and so forth. So that is another thing that we are looking at. And then, you know, when we're talking about all these biases and fairness and so on and so forth, right? It's going to be very, very region specific, very,
Hmm.
very culture specific.
Yeah.
So when I say that I want you to avoid biases in the system, what I mean is I want you to avoid culturally unacceptable biases.
Right.
I mean, there are certain kinds of biases that I would want the system to have. Right? My favorite example is I don't want you to give loans to people who don't have collateral or the ability to pay the loan back. Right? I want you to be biased against people.
Hmm.
Right? It shouldn't be that everybody should get loan with equal probability regardless of what you bring to the table. Right? So there should be some kind of a bias there. So in fact, you can't say that my system is biased against poor people because that's the way I want it to be. Right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So these kinds of questions. So what is acceptable bias and what is unacceptable bias in the context of a specific
What context?
application, the
Yeah.
region,
Yeah.
the application and the region, right? So and also, I mean, and likewise, I mean, this is one thing that we are actually experimenting with right now, right? So people have created
Hmm.
what a data was set, right? So on what they call as stereotypes.
Yeah.
So, for example, a nurse is a woman, a doctor is a man,
Yes, of
typically
course.
a pilot is a man, and air hostess or
Yeah.
women and things like that. Those kinds of biases, we call them stereotypes, right?
Hmm.
Now, there is no stereotype data set for Indian languages yet,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? People have created stereotypes for India,
Hmm.
right? For example, I mean, somebody from the north will be one way, somebody from the south will be. I mean, there are all kinds of
Yeah.
stereotypes in terms of caste and
Yeah.
religion and region and language and everything. But people have created these data sets in English.
Right.
Now, if I take the English data set and
Hmm.
translate that into a native language,
Hmm.
is it still an accurate depiction of the stereotype in that native language? Can I
Right.
just use the translated version of this data set to
Got it.
find stereotypes in Hindi or find stereotypes in Tamil, right?
Hmm.
And it turns out it's not quite the case. Right? If you actually translate it and ask a native speaker, hey, this is how a stereotype will be expressed in your language, right? This is what you will say about a woman. And that kind of, with a very high probability says no. I mean, this sounds very unnatural to me. So
Right.
I cannot use this as you know, as an evaluation tool. So we have to really think. A lot of fundamental work needs to be done for even for cases where we know what the techniques are to address these problems. We don't have the resources to do it for Indian language.
Right. Right.
So a lot of work has to be done in that space as well. So
We just heard after President Donald Trump has taken office in America, you're seeing, how tech companies have gotten rid of their fact checking and they're relying on community notes. Whether X had already started it, Meta has now followed suit, and of course there are so many. Now Google has talked about DEI, and they've all been told to relook and go back from the commitment to DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of that. Do you see this having an impact on the safety of AI going forward? Also,
see,
the
the thing is, AI. I mean, the AI market is not just the US,
mm, mm,
right? So even though the companies might be internally doing some of these in terms of their employee base and so on and so forth, but if they actually take off these safeguards from what they are doing in AI, right, they will find it hard to sell their products even in Canada. They're going to find it hard to sell their products in the European Union,
mm,
right? So I think, of course, it'll have some amount of impact in terms of what gets invested where, right? And it's going to have a little longer term impact as well. So one of the things I point out typically is that the reason some of the biases in the AI systems were visible
Hmm.
only after they went into deployment. For example, many of these AI models are very bad at recognizing African American women.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're very good at recognizing white faces,
Hmm.
and even in African American people, they are okay with detecting men, but women it's even bad.
Right.
One
Right.
of the and this was found out when they were deploying these models. Right, the reason is there are not enough African American women involved in the development of this model. So in some
Right.
sense, so if you don't have people who are actually facing the problem involved in the development, you're
Yes.
going to not address those. I mean, those might come. It's more like a second order effect that will come down
Yes.
the line.
Yeah.
But
What's the
I don't
first
think I don't
order?
think it's
Yeah.
first order effect is like, yeah, you explicitly get rid of these safeguards, right?
Right. Right.
I mean, even things that you know are a problem, right? You just get rid of them. So those I don't think is going to happen that
Hmm.
soon in
Right.
even in the AI product development. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
The AI summit that was hosted by France, we saw, from the little bit that I'm reading, and I can follow, the US Vice President was there, and his statement seemed to suggest that Europe, especially, and perhaps even the signatories to that outcome of that action plan, which the US didn't sign, are being very risk averse, are thinking of safety too much, are thinking of regulating too much, and therefore coming in the way of the opportunities and the transformative capabilities of AI. What is your assessment of that debate, and how much does it affect?
I wasn't at Paris, so I can't tell you what I mean. I've also been doing second, I mean, reading things and stuff like that.
But the debate in
But the
general.
larger piece, right?
Yeah.
I do believe that the EU is over regulating. At large, we accept that. Even India has said that, hey, we don't want to go to the extent that EU regulates it, especially for a fledgling technological environment like India. If we actually start regulating the extent which EU is doing, we'll basically kill most startups. Right, and startups are where the innovations are happening, and no, we'll be basically left with the few big companies, especially in India. It's going to be the Googles and OpenAIs who are going to come in and dominate the market, right?
Mm,
So we don't want to regulate at that level. Right? So I agree with some part of it, right? But I think the US is also going a little overboard on the other side and
mm,
taking away all their restrictions and now getting rid of the AI Safety Institute and things like that. And I think India should strike a middle ground, right?
mm,
And we should have some amount of safeguards because AI is a dangerous technology, especially in some kind of politically charged environment. AI can be used to, and it's not. I wouldn't put the blame on AI's doorstep all by itself, right? We have very unregulated access to social media,
yes.
right? So social networks and all those things, we have no way of controlling what gets disseminated through
Yes.
those channels, right? It's not just that AI is powerful, but AI crossed the web, and the level of the web penetration that is there in India, right? So that's causing the problem. But then it is there, right? So since the social media horse has bolted,
Mm,
we have to see what we can do with the AI horse,
mm,
right? To see what that's something that we can do in order to minimize some of the negative effects. I think India has to have some amount of regulations, especially in some critical domains,
mm,
but shouldn't go to the extent of what the EU has done and which can potentially stifle innovation. But you also shouldn't go to the extent of what the US has done and say, hey, look, the companies will all self-regulate themselves and we don't have to worry about tight regulations.
mm.
It's a fine line, but I think we have to walk that.
So where is India at in the AI story? It seems to be to me that there's some kind of a race, right? Like the arms race. The countries are also trying to talk about getting ahead. All this while America seemed to dominate. All the AI labs were all coming out of there, and then you have DeepSeek coming and saying, "Oh, even China's in the game." So where is India in this game? And should we be nationalistic, in our assessment of what India is doing at this point of time?
So see, the biggest challenge for us to become a leading player in any tech sector has been the level of investment in research
Mm,
in India. right? It's really a pittance compared to what happens in the US and what happens in China.
Sure.
And it's not just a blame to be, put on the government, right? I mean, the government, of course, has to spend a lot, but then even the companies, right? Even the big companies which have huge, huge margins and so on and so forth. They don't spend their money on fundamental research, right? They are more into, taking the existing products and then trying to build services around it rather than actually trying to do some core IP, and they're not investing enough, even though even if they want to do it, right, they're not investing enough into this, and that has been a huge challenge for India, right? Building the Indian ecosystem. When China decided that they are going to go after AI, and it is not something DeepSeek didn't happen overnight. I mean, China's investment in AI started in, I think, 2015 or even earlier, 2012, 13. China started investing heavily into AI. It's not like this happened, right? And it's not DeepSeek alone. So within 24 hours of DeepSeek, ByteDance had an equally good model that they released, right? And now you have all these Quen models which are equally good, and then there are more models coming out from DeepSeek, and then at least, and I've been told by people who understand the Chinese market. I'm not too familiar with it, but there are at least 10 companies at the level of what DeepSeek can do, and maybe 50 which are just slightly behind. It's not like, DeepSeek was an anomaly in China, and that doesn't happen unless there was systematic, investment into building the entire research innovation ecosystem there. So in that way, we are, lagging behind because
Sure.
of that. And
Hmm.
it's just not in, not just in AI, right? In almost every other
Yes.
advanced tech field you can take, except in space technology, because
Yeah.
of our isolation. Needed to innovate, and we went ahead and innovated. It's not like we can't innovate, so we need that driver
Hmm.
to actually do the innovation. And right now, what is happening is that, yes, we don't have a fundamentally different technology that's at the level of Chat GPT,
Hmm.
right? That came out of India, but
Yeah.
we are actually running in the race, right? We are not too bad off, especially in things like challenges that are unique to India, right? Things like language AI,
Yeah.
right? So we are actually doing pretty well in the multilingual AI space right now,
Hmm.
right? And in fact, including building models that can address these language issues in a better way than some of the commercial models and so on and so forth. So we are getting there.
You alluded to India's success with space technology, and that was largely driven by
Okay.
by government resources and
By
by
government,
the
originally by the government, but now you are actually getting a lot of space tech startups that are coming into this field as
sure.
well,
I'm
right?
saying,
So
but the
original innovation was driven by the government, yeah.
so
Yeah.
today, when it comes to AI, where is it happening?
Uh, so there are some small startups that are doing very good work, right? But
Hmm.
then the government has to invest more money into this, right? So we are not at there at a place where I will say
Hmm.
we are anywhere close to the kind of success we had with. We are nowhere close to our Mangalyaan moment in AI, not yet.
Right. So, Professor Ravi, given that as a layperson, I'm only seeing applications and I can see probably just the tip of the iceberg of what
Mhm.
AI can really do in terms of its transformative nature. Given that, do you think that India will need to do a serious leap? Can it achieve that? And is there a timeline within which this needs to happen?
So I think we kind of realize that the government realizes that. I'm not sure how much the. I mean, and I also have been talking to a bunch of philanthropic organizations and high net worth individuals who are very keen on seeing this happen. I think we realize that, right? The government is actually finally putting things into motion. I mean, we have been talking about this India AI thing for a while, but in the last couple of years, we have been having significant amounts of money being allotted for it by the government, and then we have all these initiatives to create infrastructure and to start building our own foundation models and multiple centers of excellence, and that's this huge push to get our the government data cleaned up and made available and so on and so forth. I do think that the timelines that the government has set for building India's own foundation models is a little too aggressive, but at least the funding is there. No, no. The thing is, once you start pushing people to start doing it, even if there are some half-baked solutions that are coming out,
Hmm.
what will happen is the ecosystem will get enriched. Right? You'll get more people who have practice, have not practice, who have experience doing these kinds of model building and so on and so forth, and then they will go on to find more, commercially sustainable way of doing really good models. I think this government impetus is going to get a lot of people into this space now, right? We're going to try and build these models, and I think we are moving in the right direction, right? So, but we need to move faster. in terms of identifying more money
mm,
getting these projects really up and running. And of course we have to make sure that the fount of producing these talent that
mm,
needs it, that also gets sufficiently funded and given more cushion.
mm.
So the academic institutions
Yes.
should be made more capable, right? And of course the IITs are good, right? But then we have only a handful of IITs that are good at that level, right? I mean, China probably has about 100 institutions that you can count at the level of the IITs, and
Wow.
some way better, right? And down here we have about 10 or are doing some really cutting edge work of significant volume, right? So others are still measuring up, right? So we really have. So it's not like just give money to IITs and they will do the job
Mm.
for us, right? So we really have to make sure that the entire education ecosystem also gets significant improvement, and the amount of money that is being spent on improving educational research, right, is
Yes.
barely sufficient even to go to the IIT. Even we feel the pinch when we
Yes.
compare to the kind of compute and GPU resources that are available elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so if you go to the second tier college, or even if you go to the NIT, right, the kind
Right.
of compute access they have, it's like
Mm,
nothing, right? So
mm.
then you ask people who are coming from there to get into the startup ecosystem and suddenly start building the next DeepSeek. That's not going to work, right? So you really need to have a lot more, you know,
Resources and
yeah,
systematic.
no, no, not just resource at the end point, right, but resourcing the pipeline, right? So you
Sure.
need to have resources in the entire pipeline that's going to build up to this. So that is a little bit of a long term thing, right? Maybe that will take a few 2 3 years for us to build up. In the meanwhile, we can't wait for that pipeline to get built up. So we really have to figure out what is it that we can do with the existing talent, and that is what the government is doing right now.
Professor Ravi, I'm going to let you go, but with one final question before, and that is when there's such fast-paced developments in this world of AI, and it's coming from all over the world, and there are developments on the on the technology front, on the business front, on who's buying who's offering to buy who, who's investing in what, and it all seems quite overwhelming to the layperson. What is the kind of public education you think we should have at this point, and what is imperative for Indians, even if we are, at one level, we're trying to get into the AI race by having our own AI out there and our foundation models. But as lay people, what's the minimum public education that's imperative, you think?
I actually wrote an op-ed on this some time back. I think whether we are going to be developing it or somebody else is going to develop it, right? AI is going to affect every aspect of
Mm.
life. I mean, it's
Yeah.
going to affect how every sector goes about doing their business. Just like you cannot think of doing your job, whether you are a doctor or you're a lawyer or a journalist, you cannot think of doing your job without access to word processing and Excel. And so basically some kind of office tools, right?
Yeah.
So like that, it's going to come to a point where you wouldn't be able to do your job efficiently unless you had access to some AI tools, right? Unless you're using AI tools to do your job, right? I mean, you could still do it like you're doing it now, but then you'll be like a dinosaur, right?
Yeah.
So you need to understand. So people really, the public at large, need to understand what is AI going to impact for, right?
Mm.
So whether you are a doctor, you need to understand how to use AI better. If you're a lawyer, you need to understand how AI can help you. In fact, it can do like 80% of the job that a junior would do for, like a law clerk would do, right? So and things like that.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things, right? So people need that education that needs to happen for that. That's one part of it. The second part of it is, I think AI is going to change how social interactions happen,
Mm.
right? And I think people need to understand, okay, what is it that they can rely AI on to do. In fact, now people have started, building their own AI avatars, right? That
Yeah.
can go out and order food for them, book their movie tickets and things like that. So these kinds of interactions are going to happen. So at some point of time, you will stop talking to a human being throughout the entire day. Your AI avatar will be talking to another AI avatar, and then something will happen, and stuff is
Wow.
going to come to you, right? So those kinds of things. I mean, it's at low level stuff, like I mean, like ordering food and stuff. I mean, it's not like life or death decisions yet. And so people have to understand, okay, what are this, what are the different things that is going to
No,
happen,
but
right?
but at a higher level, there could be, friendships, romantic entanglements that also happen through these chatbots. I was reading about a case in Florida where a young teenager, when a teenager committed suicide, his parents allege because of the conversation this kid was having with
Hmm.
character AI, and the avatar that was created there.
In fact, there have been instances of, I mean, this is somebody who tested it, right? Who actually asked an AI about how they are feeling depressed and how they want to fix their thing, and that they kind of forced the AI to give advice on how to commit suicide. Right now, when you start having the, kids or youngsters or even teenagers looking, I mean, talking to these companion bots and stuff like that, that is going to be another issue, right? So I think people have to start thinking about, like, I mean, like how you limit your social media time or how you limit your TV time. You have to start limiting your bot time, which is okay. So people shouldn't be saying I'm doing research by using my bot. And so they have to make sure that they're limiting. So those kinds of issues are going to come up, yes. And I was going to go back another step, right? Now you get a phone call from somebody, right? You can't, I mean, it'll come to a point where you will not be able to trust whether it's a person on the other end of the line or whether it is a bot. And even if it is a voice that you recognize. See, those,
And we're also seeing the kind of digital scams that are happening all
yeah,
over in different
yeah,
ways. So this could be
yeah.
another big risk
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you
So this people need to be educated that, hey, these kinds of things could potentially happen, right? So be on the, be on the lookout, right? And likewise, deep fakes, right? So, or fake news, right? So you have to be, I mean, fake news doesn't need AI to create. I mean, let's be very clear about it. But you need to have, whenever something comes. In fact, this is a rule of thumb I tell people: if something sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Right? So if or something sounds too fantastic to be true, hey, come on, how did that guy do this? Right? Then he probably didn't do it. It's probably some fake media, fake news that's coming out, right? So those kinds of vigilance that people need. So that part, that education certainly needs to happen. On the other side, we also need to tell people more about they have to learn about AI. I mean, there should be a small set of people, technical people who learn AI education from scratch. It's not
Right.
like it's
Yeah.
not like you something you just pick up on the job, but there is actually fundamental of AI. Even though things are changing very rapidly,
Mm.
there is certain kind of map that you need to learn. There's some kind of programming abstractions that you need to learn. There's some kind of reasoning structures and other things. So there is a fundamental component to AI education, and that is something that people have to learn before they jump into AI and start with downloading the latest greatest tool on from the internet and just start building applications on it. So
Right.
that part also needs to happen. But for the larger population, this AI awareness education certainly needs to happen. And so from the Center for Responsible AI, we are putting together multiple programs to reach out to the general public as well, right,
Mm.
in terms of the impact of AI.
Sure.
We are calling this as AI literacy,
Yes,
as
I
opposed
mean,
to.
it's
Yeah,
absolutely, digital
yeah,
literacy, AI literacy. I
yeah,
guess we'll always just have to keep learning, and that's the
yeah.
only way
The
to.
good news is the AI will help you learn faster.
Okay,
Yeah.
Professor Ravi, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for
Thank
this
you.
really interesting way of engaging with something that is quite intimidating, even though we are using it so freely.
Yes.
I really appreciate you explaining it so simply and lucidly and not letting me feel, like I don't know anything at all. So thank you. And I hope we'll keep talking. I can check in with you
Sure.
on key developments as we go along. Thank you.
Sure. Right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.